Welcome back to the Educated Podcast, the show that unlocks the real stories and innovations behind the Doctor of Education experience. Each episode welcomes trailblazing educators, industry innovators, and visionary policy leaders who share how their doctorates transformed their lives and their careers. The goal here is simple: for you to learn, and get inspired as guests reveal the diverse paths, pivots, and possibilities of the EDD journey. Our guest today didn't actually get an EDD herself. She holds a PhD from the City University of New York, but as the first African-American woman tenured in the history of Teachers College, Columbia University, she did something unparalleled. Today, we are looking at the EDD through a completely unique lens. Through her research group on disparities in health, whose motto is From Health Inequity to Equity in Health, she single-handedly sponsored and graduated 168 EDD doctoral students. She didn't just run an advisement group. She built what is arguably the most prolific, diverse EDD pipeline in higher education history. Joining us today is the legendary Dr. Barbara C. Wallace. Dr. Wallace is a professor emerita of education at Teachers College, Columbia University, where she spent 33 years building a historic legacy in multicultural psychology, addiction treatment, and health equity. A licensed clinical psychologist, EMDR trauma practitioner, and founding director of Centering Light Services, Dr. Wallace pioneered early specialized treatment models for crack cocaine addiction in Brooklyn during the height of the epidemic. She is the prolific author of 9 books, including the landmark text, Making Mandated Addiction Treatment Work. Beyond her distinguished psychological and academic career, Dr. Wallace is a visual artist who masterfully blends spirituality and creativity, specializing in oil painting and vibrant glitter art murals. Dr. Wallace, welcome to the show.
I am delighted to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And of course, as you know, I'm a stickler for exactness and references and everything being, So I just must say that I actually graduated 145 through the research group, and then there were additionals that I had graduated before I started the research group in 2003. And so the total is 168. And there was the ever so wonderful Dr. Linda Darling Hammond and one other Black woman who were brought into Teachers College with tenure, okay, as Dr. Hammond certainly deserves, Darling Hammond. So I was the first to move through the ranks and gain tenure in the 100-year history of Teachers College in Morningside Heights, doing so in the good old year 1994. So yes, with those tweaks, I can say thank you for that absolutely beautiful introduction, Minerva. I so appreciate the invitation and the energy and love of that introduction.
Okay, lesson learned. You hold a PhD in clinical psychology, yet you chose to spend 33 years at Teachers College, nurturing and graduating a legendary number of EDD scholars.
Yes. I think 145 is pretty legendary. And so such a global and diverse cohort. It indeed was pioneering. And I thank the divine forces for having used me to be a part of such a wonderful mission.
So, from your vantage point, what makes the EDD such a powerful, transformative vehicle for social change compared to other doctoral pathways?
Yes. Well, one of the individuals who spoke on this topic was Dr. Edmund Gordon, who will turn 105 years old and is still running. His passion's still running. So he's going to have that birthday on June 13th. So when I was at Teachers College and had an online event, which we all learned to love doing during the pandemic and even post-pandemic, one of the things that he talked about was the distinction between the PhD that really oriented people toward research. And so they might end up having primarily research careers. Whereas the EDD was something that, yes, involved research, and many of the graduates of the research group on disparities in health went on to be successful recipients of National Institute of Health grants and other grants, principal investigators. Yet it also really allowed them to have a lens and a focus on practice, on interventions. As a matter of fact, I remember doing a postdoc with Narcotic Drug Research Incorporated, NDRI, in New York City. And my main mentor was Dr. Bruce Johnson. And I will never forget the day that he said, with the greatest pride, the millions of dollars they've gotten, the number of grants they had received, and he added, and we have never done an intervention. Never done an intervention, never actually evaluated the extent to which something that could have been done in the community actually led to outcomes that were transformational for that community. And so I believe that had a profound influence upon me. Couldn't believe it. And so part of my mission was that individuals would be able to go back to their diverse communities, various places around the world, from New Delhi to Haiti to Jamaica, wherever it might be, to Cameroon, to Ghana. And they would have the skills to do the research and evaluate the outcomes of what might indeed qualify as an intervention, something that was really going to, quote unquote, simply, don't you want to help people? Don't you want to help your community, as opposed to just racking up publication after publication after publication? And the other observation I had was that although the institution was NDR, Narcotic Drug Research Incorporated, that the main addiction that I witnessed was the compulsive search for grant money that they were all addicted to, because they were addicted to soft money. And so I must say that I had the privilege of being at Teachers College, Columbia University, where I did receive a salary, and certainly grants augmented the salaries of some of my colleagues. I did not have the good fortune of being a recipient of a National Institute of Health grant or National Institute of Drug Abuse grant, partly, I think, because there are later articles that came out, research articles, and I can actually send you some of the links that talk about the way in which grants that even mention community, quite often they were eliminated the night before the committee even sat down to evaluate the quality of the research and make decisions. So community, health disparities, that some of these concepts were not aligned with the values of those who were evaluating the grants. I remember my colleague coming back from a grant review whose office was next door to mine. And one of the things he said was, just quite frankly, that all the grants from places like Emory and other institutions were eliminated the night before and never even made it to the table to be examined across a very intense weekend of examining these grants. So that's just a personal anecdote shared with me that really complements what later articles have come out to say, that there was some, to be frank, racism, discrimination that was going on. So it was my good fortune to go to Ghana, and the individual who was my host once said to me, how can you be there with no community? And so I thought about it. And what I did was I created in 2003 the research group on disparities in health and created my own community. And what we did was we became colleagues in the pursuit of research that was very much about avoiding deficit-oriented research, because a lot of the research out there tended to blame the victim. A lot of research was very much comparing Blacks to white, Blacks to Hispanics. And so if you would read some of that literature, it would be very depressing because the Blacks and Hispanics, on whatever measures they used, were performing at lower levels. And so it was very much designed in such a way that it was blaming the victim because the main difference was demographics. So I became determined to make sure that my students knew how not to allow their research to be misused, okay, in the service of those who wanted to accumulate deficit-oriented and blame the victim research so that it's like, oh, these communities are horrible, they've got a lot of problems, but instead to always include measures of things like stress, okay, so that, or social support, so that you would find that those individuals who were having the most difficult times and might be scoring lower on measures of whatever it is that you were looking at, that at the same time they're higher in stress. So that you're able to capture experiences of things such as exposure to racism or discrimination or lower socioeconomic status or more difficulty in terms of employment and maintaining high quality employment that was going to allow them to improve the quality of their lives. So the idea is that it was very much about ensuring that my students understood the social context and could then also look at things like coping and strengths and identify strengths that you might see in a population that might be all Black or all Hispanic or all whatever it might be, adding legitimacy to the idea that we could also do in-depth research that was really looking at some of the underlying mechanisms that were operating that might explain some of the differences that others had found in their research. So that's a long way of saying that the goal was to maximize what the EDD could do in terms of developing research scientists who had a passion for doing community-based research that would include interventions that might also enhance the coping ability of those individuals that they were examining. Or if it was a first step in a line of research, they would at least identify the factors that needed to be addressed in future interventions.
Wow. You were able to circle that all back, Dr. Bruce. That is really incredible. You graduated 168 doctoral students. And that's not including the master's students. That's not including any of the other committees that you served outside of Columbia. So when you look back at that number, does it feel real to you?
It feels real to the extent that, yes, I would go a lot further and say that many years, the colleagues in my particular department would graduate 3. Some years they didn't graduate any. But if we look across the entire college, there were some of my colleagues, for example, some other African-American women, who might have cohorts of 6 or 8. And to the extent that I experienced fatigue, yes, I know for a fact that I put a lot of hard work, sweat, my heart, and engaged in this labor of love, and really allowed myself and asked that I be used as an instrument for the doing of a divine will. And that I very much felt a responsibility to counter what I felt some other professors were about, which was filling their classrooms and having the students, because the institution was really tuition dependent. And so you needed to have bodies to fill your classes to ensure that the university was getting enough money to sustain your paycheck. And what I observed was that when people had finished all of the coursework and it was really time to spend a focused journey on the doctoral dissertation, that many of them kind of wishy-washy, not really committed to that, didn't want to do the work involved. And so I felt an ethical imperative to clear the pipeline, because when I started the research group in 2003, and then by 2004, 5, 6, it's as though there was a backlog. It's as though it was clogged with individuals who had done all their coursework, but were not getting the time and attention that was needed for them to successfully move on to the dissertation, to the research, and to graduation. And so I thought it was highly unethical for our program, for our department, to be using students as warm bodies without fulfilling what was really the contract. The contract was that people sought out this program in order to receive a doctorate. So it was very much what I felt was an ethical obligation, what I felt was very much a spiritual mission, and what I felt that I was able to do. So this is where you're talking about the capacity of a woman to have a big heart, the capacity of a Black woman to gather all of these children under her skirt. So that's a metaphor for a nurturing African woman, like in a village, that she gathers all the children under her cloth, under her skirt, both to protect them, because it's not to say that individuals might actually suffer some harm through the process of working toward a dissertation if the intent is not genuine for them to be supported sufficiently. So that's really where it came from. There are ways in which I did suffer. I had a close colleague who said to me, because there is this metaphor that we can't escape the United States, which is of the plantation. And so many of our organizations in the United States, the group dynamics perfectly replicate a plantation, that there are some white, quote unquote, masters in charge, and that basically all of the patients on this ward are Black, or all of the individuals working in this factory are Black, and those in charge are Caucasian. So part of what I had to have in my awareness that was thrust there by a close friend, colleague, was that I was the biggest Black mammy at Teachers College. Which, to a certain extent, is one way to look at it. I mean, here I felt as though I was doing a spiritual mission. But on the other hand, it turned out that it was a lot of hard work. And so it would be wonderful if in this new age, with a new paradigm, that we don't have to replicate the dynamics of the plantation and even collude with some of those dynamics, but instead that we can have real equity, where there are those who are advisors or sponsors of all races, ethnicities, and genders, who basically embrace all students, regardless of their diversity or their global roots. So I would hope that none of my doctoral students over the next 20, 30 years have to replicate the model that I created, which was to work very, very hard and to ensure that people had success, and that their entire family generation could be elevated to a new level because of receipt of the doctorate. And their children could have this whole new value of perseverance because they saw how their parents worked hard. And their parents who worked hard to support their graduate could also feel this relief that this is the fulfillment of my prayers. This is the fulfillment of my great-grandmother's prayers, my grandmother's prayers. So that's where it was very much a spiritual mission, that we are the fulfillment of the prayers of women who truly were Black mammies on plantations. Okay. And that instead, I had a great deal of spiritual assistance. So that would be my counter to those who would say, oh, weren't you just a Black mammy on the plantation taking care of all of these, individuals? And I would say, no, it was very much a spiritual mission. That's kind of heavy.
Spiritual mission it is. And so we're in the age of woke, so I suppose it's quite appropriate as well. In speaking about your cohorts and the spiritual mission, your cohorts were profoundly diverse, including African Americans, continental Africans, Asians, East Asians, Latinos, Latinas, the whole gamut.
The Caribbean, yes.
Even people of European descent,
Yes.
well as same gender loving or LGBTQ plus defined scholars.
Yes.
Academia can often be a cold place in which you described as the plantation in some regards for marginalized students. How did you intentionally design the RGDH to act as a psychological sanctuary for these future doctors?
Mhm. Well, it's interesting. And I just want to go back and say that my largest cohort was 16. Many cohorts were 12, 10, 8, so that these were extraordinarily large cohorts. And one of the things that helped after, by 2006, was that I had started the research group on disparities in health annual conference. So it was an annual health disparities conference at Teachers College, Columbia University, which was a 2-day event. So that helped to serve as a magnet to attract students. And the reality is that diverse students are very much concerned about equity. So that if you're talking about LGBTQ students plus, that they're very concerned about issues of equity. That whether we're talking about those from the Caribbean or continental Africa or Asia, that they became interested. I had one student from South Korea who said to me that it wasn't until she was in my class that she really felt recognized and heard. And so that's why she was drawn to me as a dissertation advisor. So to bring your heart to your work and to see the individual and to hear them, to be with them in an empathic embrace, okay, which can happen while you are teaching, then it draws students from diverse backgrounds. So whether you are, let's say, a white female who has noticed that I haven't really been a size 10 or 12. And I did notice that it seems like the blondes who were size 10 and 12 got all sorts of attention, but I just never got that attention. Or the older nurse. There was a time when I had lots of nurses who were in our doctoral program who were drawn to me. And because they were in their 50s, they felt like I don't get the same time and attention or interest as it seems as though some of the younger female students do. So they were also drawn to me, so that I was indiscriminate in my exuding a certain amount of warmth. Now, that's not to say that many students experienced me as a rather hard taskmaster. So some of you may be surprised that I'm talking about exuding this warmth. But there's two sides. There's the recognition that some of those professors are going to be on your dissertation committees. Some of the professors who I see from around the college who may be really kind of cold or really kind of disinterested. And so it was an act of preparing people for the cold reality that this may seem like tough love, but you're going to be up against a really cold wall that just wants to evaluate and is almost searching for how can I see weaknesses in this research. Because I also started a revolution at Teachers College in 1998 in response to what I perceived as some racist emails and what I perceived as a tone of like it was okay to make these really bad multicultural jokes in the fall of 98. So I challenged that. And a revolution ensued where I was holding these meetings, like focus groups, in the lunchroom and bringing people together who were talking about all sorts of experiences of oppression that they had experienced at Teachers College. And it culminated in an April 12th report called the Dove Report, based on all these interviews. And it actually led to the establishment or the announcement the following fall that there would be a new office called the Office of Diversity and Community. And by January, Janice Robinson was hired as the director. And of course, we had suggested that the person be at the vice presidential level to address these issues. And it took 10 years for Janice Robinson to become a vice president. So part of what happened was that because I led this revolution, my institutional review board applications of my students were being looked at with the coldest of eyes and getting rejected. And there was a lot of hostility toward me because of what I had done. People didn't like the fact that I'm talking about there's racism or oppression at Teachers College. So that's part of what led to the research group also pioneering online research, because the online research protocol basically did not have to go through that kind of full committee review where a random group of professors from around the college might remember Barbara Wallace and what she had said and done and what she's represented. But instead, it was a smaller review. And that's what really positioned us to also smoothly continue our research during the pandemic, because we were already doing online research. We had pioneered online focus groups. We had pioneered surveys. We pioneered using social media to distribute the surveys. I remember the first year that someone used Twitter, they were able to get 50 responses in a week. I remember that using the combination of social media, that it wasn't unusual to get 250 subjects in 2 weeks if you really worked it like a job. So all of these things meshed together. And it's to acknowledge that there was a lot of going up against the system and really demanding that the system change and speaking truth to power, which also required a lot of spiritual work.
Yeah, for sure. And I was just thinking about what you mentioned with regards to the annual Health Disparities Conference. One of the best on-time conferences that I've ever attended. I'm recalling Dr. David Williams' presentation, which
Yes.
made my mouth hit the floor.
One of the best.
One of the best.
96 slides in his deck.
Wow. We wasn't even there for that long, so he did an excellent job, and it's most memorable. You used, as mentioned, that platform to recruit new students and push a new paradigm that focused on community strengths rather than cultural deficits. What was the most radical shift? And you mentioned a whole bunch of things, even like the dove, but what was the most radical shift you wanted to see in how the scientific community views Black and Brown health?
I was actually thinking about this the other day, that it was actually the first conference in 2006. And one of the speakers was someone who actually worked for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and was a high-ranking officer and was really also interacting with National Institute of Health bigwigs, so to speak. And they, of course, have to get all of their conference participation approved. And in looking at the program and the documents, and also what I actually declared was that we were actually launching this whole era of not seeking to eliminate health disparities, because we recognized that you had to both reduce them as well as eliminate them, and that we needed to create a whole menu of evidence-based approaches. And that this was so radical and went against what the Centers for Disease of Control party line was, because they're all about, oh, we're going to eliminate them, we're going to eliminate them. It's like, well, can we have just a little bit of reality here? That we're going to need a whole, perhaps decade of evidence-based approaches to reduce them and then eliminate them. And so she had some pushback from a senator against this conference, because it was just that radical. But she did get her travel and her participation approved. But she took me aside and said, this is what happened. And the senator, so to think that even the very first annual Health Disparities Conference had reached the level of attracting the opposition of a senator from the Midwest, and the recognition that it was really going against what was the federal government's approach to these issues, just begins to suggest how radical it was. And so what we were seeking to do was to bring in the very best researchers, practitioners, those who had done intervention research, so that we could really identify an entire menu of evidence-based approaches to reducing and then eliminating health disparities as the ultimate goal. but recognizing that it might take a decade just to really identify all of these evidence-based interventions. The other thing that was really radical was that it really sought to empower the students who were recent graduates, who were now professors, department chairs, or newly minted principal investigators, or those who had just finished collecting their research data, or were presenting even the framework for how they were going to do it the subsequent year. And it was a way to empower them to really have that experience of community and professionalism to present at what had become a nationally recognized conference. What we actually created was a 2.5-day community, because we also had a community health fair where Harlem Hospital, or there might be outside a van doing vision screenings. There might be outside a mobile van doing breast cancer screenings, and then inside diabetes, hypertension screenings. And at the same time, in the cafeteria, there was a poster session with graduate students and also some professionals, and also some of the graduates were bringing their students. I remember David Brown, who was at Jackson State University in Mississippi, would bring like 10, 12 students. And this is a white man who perhaps didn't get tenure, partly because no one could believe that he could have such a wonderful heart, in addition to his research acumen. Yet he was there with his father from California, who was a professor. So it really was just a wonderful opportunity to nurture everyone wherever they might be in their career, whether they were Cornell West or Michelle Alexander or David Satcher or motivational interviewing pioneers, Miller, as well as Stages of Change or trans-theoretical model pioneers, James Prochaska, who was at the first conference, and then also Dee Clementi. So it was a wonderful way to introduce students to some of the very best quality professionals and researchers who were contributing to advancing this research agenda of identifying evidence-based practices that would begin to transform the health and bring health equity and justice to those who in prior eras were very well documented in some of that blame the victim, deficit-oriented research, just comparing Blacks, whites, Hispanics, that really had established some of these disparities in health.
You named a full list of prolific scholars, and all of their research and teaching is absolutely remarkable, and it continues to influence scholarship today. Well, I'm speaking about Teachers College, and it's rare that anyone could say that they've been in one institution or location for 3 decades, but you have certainly done that. And so you can't talk about the history of Teachers College without talking about the institutional memory and the giants who walked those halls, you being one of them. You waged a fierce and deeply intentional campaign to rename TC's tallest building, originally named after Edward Thorndike, the founding father of educational psychology, who was also a prominent eugenicist, argued that his name belonged off the building and it should instead bear the name of another doctor of education scholar, icon, Dr. Edmund Gordon. Could you explain how during 2020, what prompted you to launch the intense daily email campaign to the Board of Trustees titled Fierce Urgency of Now? Time for Gordon Tower, in all capital letters. Ultimately, the college removed Thorndike's name, but designated it as Building 528 to preserve it for future major financial donors or donor. How did you process that institutional decision?
Well, let me give credit to some of my students. And there was one student in particular who identifies as Latinx with some indigenous ties also, who bought this mission to me. And I embraced it as a way of supporting her and legitimizing what a whole group of students at Teachers College were doing, a diverse group. So I bought my stature as a tenured full professor to this battle, so to speak. And yes, took a lot of risks. So let me just say this for those who are listening, that when you're going to lead a revolution, and that would have been my second big revolution that I led at Teachers College, part of my rationale for leading the first revolution was that I was the only tenured, at that point, tenured female professor, that there were really two other Black male professors who were tenured. So I pulled a couple of books off the shelf written by some of our historical luminaries to build up the courage to do this. But I felt that it was kind of like my oral obligation to speak power to truth. So then I did it again in joining the students in this battle and really just put myself on the front line. At that point, also tenured a full professor. And so for anyone out there who's thinking about leading revolutions, it's very wise for a group to decide who has enough job security to lead the revolution, because there are the realities of rents and mortgages and things of that sort. So that I was the one who perceived myself. But that's my recommendation. Let's not just nilly-willy say, okay, it's time to, although, there also were times for that, to just risk everything, to make good trouble, as John Lewis would say, as one of the people who got beaten up and bloodied in the battle for justice. So going back to this particular battle, a lot of the things that I said would just pour out of me in the early morning as protest poetry. It was very provocative and it was extremely, extremely risky. And part of what may have helped was that there was some movement that had occurred at Princeton, my alma mater, in terms of acknowledging some of these problems with buildings and names and what they represented. So we then did wage a rather lengthy campaign to specifically advocate. So, okay, part one of the victory was the name was taken off. Part two was really to agitate for Ed Gorton's name to be on it. And again, with this particular student, a whole booklet, I compiled an entire booklet that was making the case for this change and for acknowledging Ed Gorton. And he was very appreciative. So the president kind of felt he was making a compromise. He was trying to make nice, so to speak. And so they named the Institute for Urban Minority Education, which Ed Gorton had founded, after Ed Gorton. Now it's an institute. So that was their compromise. And you're correct that whether they clearly stated it or not, they really wanted to use this unnamed building as an opportunity probably to attract billions. So there was a point where the students were really ready to really push this. And again, with my spiritual roots, something told me there's a time to be quiet and still. And that's what I felt. I felt that it was time to be quiet and still. And so I did not urge, I really shared my stance and suggested also to the students that sometimes there's a time. Because if you look at the history of wealth in this country, or wealth globally, that there are very wealthy families. Today, there are those who are speaking very openly about the number of families that have long roots in wealth, and that maybe just 10 families run this entire country. Maybe just 100, 300 families or names are associated with major decisions. that this reality is more complicated than we perceive it to be. And so I did not want to endanger myself or endanger students. These are like thoughts years later that I could have put myself in danger, that the students could have put themselves in danger. And that's only with more information coming out about some of the things that go on that we can no longer be naive about. But at that point, it was just like, there's a time to be silent. There's a time to be still. And so this is where I would urge everyone listening that you have to follow that same kind of feeling, that same kind of advice, because I had pushed very, very hard, very, very hard, very aggressive in my protest poetry, almost frankly insulting, which is probably not a good thing to necessarily do with trustees. And I must tell you what my tenure letter said. My tenure letter said that I served at the pleasure of the trustees. That's what it meant to get tenure at Teachers College. That you got a letter that's saying you are serving at the pleasure of the trustees. Okay? Which means that how displeased can they get? It helps to be spiritually connected so that you can have a sense of when is it time to be like Harriet Tubman and say, we're going, get up, we're crossing this river. The point, though, is that it's important really to be aligned and centered and to allow your intuition and your gut feeling to tell you. It's like with anything, there's nothing like something just telling you, oh, let me go left instead of going right. And what might you avoid? Because something in you said, I'm going to take this street instead of that street.
Yeah.
That's the kind of intuition and knowing and spiritual alignment that I think we all want to strive for.
Absolutely. And speaking about center, you're notoriously known for having this affirmation that says, I am calm, centered, and balanced. And Dr. Jonice Caleb actually mentioned you and that affirmation. Could you share with us like how using an affirmation such as I am calm, centered, and balanced to help one navigate a revolution as you described?
Oh, yes. And I guess obtaining a doctorate is really a personal revolution, a complete transformation. It really started when I was working in Brooklyn, again, with those who are recovering from severe addiction. And it was given to me. I really believe that it was given to me through the heart of Jesus. And of course, I never mentioned that. I never said that to any of my doctoral students, but that's what I've come to believe. So I was giving it to those who are in recovery. I actually had a sheet that I would make copies of. That it was instructions for how to repeat this, repeat it at least 9 times, or turn into a 10 or 20-minute meditation. And then I also had, I am healing in heart, mind, and body every day in every way. I'm healing in heart, mind, and body. And I actually heard once that one of my clients, because I would do consultation work in Brooklyn, actually put it on her locker at the homeless shelter. And people would stand in front of her locker at the homeless shelter. It was reverberating out and reaching people in that way. As a matter of fact, I was doing some consultation work and was giving out this sheet. And this client said, you gave this to me 10 years ago.
It had legs.
And of course, I blame relapse on the quality of addiction treatment generally, and not necessarily to the individual. This was someone who was getting this information once again. So I would give it to every student in every class. And Dr. Imani Mayat, actually, this goes back to 94, she would write it before taking the epidemiology exam. She would go in and put it on the blackboard so that it also spread to other classes besides my own. I really felt as though it was really critical for someone who is beginning the doctoral dissertation journey. And I had a client that was totally, totally hopeless. She hadn't even been in touch with her committee for about 6 months. And this is a Caucasian woman who was in one part of the country now, but was trying to get a degree from a Northeastern university. And I was like, okay, make all the changes that they told you to make back in January, and you're going to send this document to them. But what was critical was that she began to do I am calm, centered, and balanced because her anxiety was off the chart. Her situation was a real miracle. Because of the mentoring and coaching I gave her, they went from just leave us alone, forget about your doctorate, you're not even going to graduate, you're never going to graduate, to receiving her doctorate this last May with the utmost joy. And the critical ingredient is that you have to be able to self-regulate your anxiety. I would say the gain in doctoral dissertation is one of the most anxiety promoting things that anyone can do. It's extremely difficult. And so this was key for all of my doctoral students. I actually felt that sometimes when I was talking to a doctoral student in the research group, for example, that their ability to even hear the feedback, that they really couldn't even hear what I was saying until they began to do this, what one of my graduates in New Delhi, India, called the mantra. So she would call it the mantra. I am calm, centered, and balanced. I am calm, centered, and balanced. And what's important is the hypnotic suggestion, which really works, which really does happen, which is if you repeat it enough, whenever you are anxious, you're going to find that you're automatically repeating it inside. And I even had that experience recently where I was adjusting to a new consultation job and a new sleep schedule. So I would repeat it before I would go to sleep. And it got to the point where I'm just lying down, getting ready to go to sleep, and I notice I'm starting to repeat it. So it really, really works that way. But the other thing that I also did was a manifestation exercise, which is to have students visualize themselves at their graduation. I did this with the student I worked with this year, who was one of the most dire situations, that you visualize that you're at graduation. You visualize yourself with shaking the hand. It's a new job. Someone putting keys to a car or a new apartment in your hand. You can't see them. You're just going to combine the visual image plus extreme joy plus extreme gratitude. I'll visualize something right now. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, yes, yes. So you want to put the energy of the marathon runner or the Olympic athlete who has just won a gold medal. And you actually want to create this neurochemical spike in your brain from the joy that you feel that is so extreme, along with the gratitude, which is so intense, and the visual image. And so it's a very powerful manifestation exercise that your audience can use for just about anything.
Yeah, I'm excited and I'm visualizing it. Yeah, that yes, yes, Olympic gold feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah, speaking about the Olympic gold feeling, Dr. Edmund Gordon, who we spoke about a little earlier during this segment, is a monumental figure in American education, hands down. I understand that he once paid you an extraordinary, massive compliment regarding your work and your pipeline. Can you share with our listeners what Dr. Gordon told you and what those words meant to your spirit?
I remembered the moment, I remember the feeling, and I don't remember the exact words. Close this out.
Thank you very much. I'll be very brief. Professor, I have seldom in my life been prouder to be a professor than tonight, looking at the work that you and Pulanov and Alleganti and Bash do. If I were ever to be returned to the deanship at TC, I think I would go out and personally raise the money to create the Du Bois Chair, to name you the Du Bois Professor, because Du Bois thought that we Black people who gain privilege have a responsibility to bring other people along with us. And that's what you're doing, dear friend. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I guess this is where I can share some of my vulnerability. As someone who has given and given and given and given so much, And receiving back has been such a rare thing. Sometimes you don't really know how to fully absorb it, you know? So that's part of my learning at this point in my life, is really to accept gifts, to accept the positive feedback. I've created this event to honor him, and he starts honoring me with this really extraordinary compliment. Yeah.
As we wrap up, I just want to ask a few more questions.
Okay.
And if your 168 EDD graduates were all standing in one room right now, looking at the state of global health equity and education, what is the charge or directive you would give them for the next decade?
To accept that some of the systems that sustained inequity and oppression may actually have to fall or disintegrate or dissolve, and that they want to distinguish themselves from being a pillar of light, walking in a new golden age, from a pillar that's holding up some of those systems of injustice. That by virtue of them having integrated themselves into these systems as department chairs or full professors or principal investigators or directors of hospitals or clinics, that they want to find a way to assist organizations in transitioning from hierarchical structures that inevitably oppressed and discriminated to organizations that can embrace and, with a non-hierarchical equality, foster transformation. And I would hope that from what we have shared, they actually have the skills to be leaders in that transformation and to realize that they may know more about how to create such institutions of equity and justice, and institutions that will support the liberation and the upliftment and the awakening of all of humanity, and that they allow themselves to recognize that they receive something that has equipped them to soften maybe, or explain to others that there's a transition that we're going through, and that yes, we can, as communities with a collective value system, create something new that's really going to sustain health for the next century. And I love you all.
That's wonderful. With that said, what advice do you have for an EDD student listening to this podcast today who might be feeling isolated, overwhelmed, or wondering if their research can truly change the world?
My email is bcw3@tc, like Teachers College, .columbia.edu. And I have the Wallace method, and I'm delighted to be a coach and to form cohorts of groups to work with. At the same time, to use that manifestation technique and to really magnetize to yourself the sponsor or the committee that can really work for you, that you're sitting there and you're like, yes, 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 this is the perfect sponsor. This is the perfect advisor for me. And you don't know who it is. It may be someone of any race, ethnicity, gender. You can create reality. Okay. So that even though people of color may not be very well distributed in your doctoral program, that you have to find a way to magnetize and to create the opportunity so that this reality comes to you and this future comes to you, and that you embrace it, and that you really use these two tools: I am calm, centered, and balanced, and this manifestation. Visualize it, express extreme joy to the point that you almost feel like endorphins have just been released in your brain, and extreme gratitude, and then allow that to manifest. And that also to realize, to call on some of your ancestors, because there are ancestral spirits, like I said earlier, to be the fulfillment of your great, great, great grandmother's prayers. Okay. Your great great grandmother's prayers, your great grandmother's prayers, your grandmother's prayers, that we are the realization of those prayers. Okay. And so they survived, in some cases, the Middle Passage, in some cases, migrant farming, bent over their back, whatever it is that they survived. And that you are never alone. No matter how it looks, you're never alone. There are spirits and guides who are always with you, some of them your ancestors, and that you just have to believe and you shall achieve.
Beautiful, caring woman.
This is what you said BCW stood for, beautiful, caring woman.
That is you wholeheartedly.
And I fully accept it now. Thank you.
I appreciate your time, your energy, your love, your advisement, everything you offer me and cohorts to come and come. Thank you, listeners. If today's conversation made you think, laugh, or dream bigger, hit subscribe, leave a comment or a review, and share this episode with another current or aspiring EDD. Your support helps these stories reach more people who are ready to step into their own leadership journey. Until next time, keep learning, keep leading, and keep finding new ways to become addicted.